The end of another grueling shift was finally here. Armando Salazar stood in the dimly lit corridor of the hospital San Ángel, his shoulders drooping under the weight of exhaustion. His uniform, once pristine and white, was now a canvas of wrinkles and sweat stains, testament to the day's relentless demands. Armando's eyes, heavy with fatigue, scanned the last of the patient charts. He could hear the muted conversations of his colleagues, their voices a gentle hum in the background. They spoke in hushed tones, their laughter a soft murmur that floated through the sterile air, a fleeting moment of levity in a place so often filled with sorrow. As he finally closed his locker, Armando's thoughts drifted away from the hospital to the small apartment he called home. He pictured his daughter, Victoria, and her wide, innocent eyes. Victoria's illness was a constant worry, a storm cloud that never left his mind. The cost of her medication was astronomical, and the bills piled up faster than he could manage. His colleagues often teased him about his relentless dedication. "Another late night with the medical books, Armando?" one of them called out, a friendly grin on his face. "Or helping Victoria with her homework?" Armando smiled wearily, the corners of his mouth lifting just a bit. "Both," he replied, his voice tinged with the weight of his responsibilities. Armando walked slowly towards the exit, the hospital's antiseptic smell mingling with the cool night air as he stepped outside. The city of Guadalajara was alive with the sounds of the night. Distant car horns, the occasional bark of a dog, and the murmur of conversations from the nearby market. He paused for a moment, looking up at the stars, feeling the weight of his world pressing down on him. The cool night air wrapped around Armando Salazar as he stepped out of the hospital San Ángel, his body sagging with fatigue. The street outside was alive with the usual evening bustle, cars honking, people chatting, and the distant sounds of vendors closing up shop. He breathed deeply, trying to shake off the weariness of another long day. As he walked towards his car, Armando noticed a figure slumped against the hospital wall. Her clothes were tattered and she clutched her chest, her face pale and contorted in pain. Each breath she took seemed to be a monumental effort. Without a second thought, Armando rushed to her side, his medical training kicking in instinctively. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked, his voice calm and soothing despite the urgency of the situation. She looked up at him with eyes filled with distress, unable to speak. Gently, he supported her frail frame, his touch firm yet reassuring. The bustling street outside the hospital became a blur as he focused solely on the woman in need. "We need to get you inside," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The old woman nodded weakly, her grip tightening on his arm as if drawing strength from his presence. Cars continued to honk, and people hurried by, oblivious to the small drama unfolding at the hospital entrance. Guiding her with determined steps, Armando led her back into the hospital. The bright lights and antiseptic smell hit them as they crossed the threshold. He spotted an empty wheelchair nearby and gently helped her into it. "Let's get you to a consultation room," he murmured, pushing the wheelchair with steady hands. They reached an empty consultation room, and Armando carefully helped her onto the examination table. Her breathing was labored and sweat dotted her forehead. "What's your name?" he asked softly, hoping to distract her from the pain. "Luz," she managed to whisper, her voice barely audible. "Doña Luz." "All right, Doña Luz, I'm Armando. I'm going to take care of you," he said, his tone comforting. He quickly checked her vitals, his brow furrowing with concern. Her blood pressure was dangerously low, and he suspected a heart issue. Armando's mind raced with the possible repercussions of his actions. The hospital had strict policies about treating patients without proper documentation, especially those who couldn't pay. But looking at Doña Luz, he knew he couldn't turn her away. This is what I became a nurse for, he thought, the conviction in his heart stronger than the fear of losing his job. He measured her blood pressure and listened to her heartbeat with his stethoscope. "You're having a heart issue, Doña Luz. We need to stabilize you first," he explained, administering a medication to help regulate her heart rate. She watched him with a mixture of gratitude and fear, her eyes never leaving his face. Minutes felt like hours as Armando worked methodically, his hands moving with practiced precision. He kept talking to her, asking simple questions to keep her conscious. "Do you have family nearby?" he asked. No family," she replied, her voice shaky. "I'm alone." The weight of her words pressed down on him. Here was a woman, vulnerable and alone, relying solely on his compassion. "You're not alone now, Doña Luz. I'll make sure you're safe," he promised. As her condition began to stabilize, Armando knew he had to find a more private place for her. The hospital's policy enforcers would soon notice the breach if she remained in a consultation room. "Can you walk a bit?" he asked. "I think so," she whispered, struggling to sit up. Supporting her carefully, Armando led her to the staff rest area, a small room with a couch and a few chairs. "Rest here for a while. I'll be back to check on you soon," he said, covering her with a blanket. Her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, Armando. You're very kind." He smiled gently. "Just doing what I can. Try to rest." The consultation room was stark and clinical, the cold white walls giving off an air of sterility. The scent of antiseptic lingered in the air, a sharp reminder of the environment's purpose. Armando gently guided Doña Luz to the single examination table, her frail body trembling with each step. "Here, sit down," Armando said softly, helping her onto the table. He moved quickly but with precision, gathering the necessary equipment. The dim overhead light cast long shadows, but his hands were steady and sure. "Let's check your blood pressure," he murmured, wrapping the cuff around her thin arm. As he pumped the bulb, the soft hiss of the machine filled the silence. He watched the gauge, his eyes narrowing in concentration. "Just breathe normally," he instructed, his voice calm and steady. Doña Luz's breathing was shallow and rapid, but she focused on Armando's words, trying to calm herself. Her eyes, wide with fear, gradually softened as she looked at him. The tension in her shoulders slowly eased. "You're safe now," Armando whispered, glancing up from the monitor. "Just breathe." The numbers on the screen confirmed his suspicions. Her blood pressure was dangerously high. Armando quickly made a mental note of her symptoms: chest pain, difficulty breathing, high blood pressure. Classic signs of a cardiac event. He reached for a stethoscope, gently placing the cold metal disc against her chest. "Try to relax," he said, listening intently to her heartbeat. The erratic rhythm confirmed his fears. He needed to stabilize her, and fast. Armando administered a medication to lower her blood pressure, his movements swift and practiced. He spoke to her in soothing tones, explaining each step. "This will help reduce the pressure on your heart. You'll feel better soon," he assured her. Doña Luz's breathing began to even out, her tense muscles slowly relaxing. The fear in her eyes gave way to a glimmer of hope. She looked at Armando, her gratitude evident in her gaze. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Armando smiled gently. "It's my job," he replied, though he knew it was more than that. He felt a deep sense of fulfillment, a reminder of why he had chosen this profession. But beneath the calm exterior, Armando's mind was racing. He knew he was crossing a line. The hospital had strict policies about treating patients without proper documentation or insurance. By helping Doña Luz, he was putting his career at risk. He glanced at the door, half expecting a supervisor to walk in and reprimand him. Some rules are meant to be bent, he reassured himself. The thought of doing nothing, of leaving Doña Luz to suffer, was unacceptable. He couldn't ignore the ethical obligation he felt as a healthcare provider. As he continued to monitor her condition, Armando's thoughts drifted to his family. He thought of Victoria, his young daughter, and how he would want someone to help her if she were in need. The idea of losing his job weighed heavily on him, but the image of Victoria's innocent face gave him strength. The minutes ticked by slowly. Armando stayed by Doña Luz's side, ensuring her condition remained stable. He checked her vitals regularly, each time feeling a wave of relief as her numbers improved. "Thank you," Doña Luz repeated, her voice a bit stronger now. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, reflecting a mix of relief and gratitude. Armando nodded, squeezing her hand gently. "Rest now. We'll take care of you," he said, his voice firm but kind. He knew the challenges that lay ahead. The administration would not be pleased with his decision, and there would likely be consequences. But at that moment, all that mattered was that Doña Luz was safe and on the road to recovery. As he stepped out of the consultation room to inform the necessary personnel, Armando took a deep breath. He felt a mix of apprehension and resolve. He had done what was right, and that conviction gave him the courage to face whatever came next. The sun had barely risen when Armando received the summons. Dr. Sandoval's office was on the top floor, far removed from the bustling activity of the hospital wards. The hallway leading to it was quiet, almost eerily so, the only sound the echo of Armando's footsteps. He knocked on the door, the sound sharp and intrusive in the stillness. A curt "Enter" came from inside. Armando took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The office was oppressively silent, the weight of the reprimand hanging in the air. Dr. Sandoval sat behind a massive mahogany desk, his stern expression betraying no hint of warmth. "Sit," Dr. Sandoval said, his tone as cold as the room itself. Armando obeyed, the chair creaking slightly under his weight. "We have rules for a reason, Salazar," Dr. Sandoval barked, his voice slicing through the silence. "Your actions yesterday were not just a breach of protocol. They were a direct challenge to the standards this hospital upholds." Armando met his gaze, jaw clenched, eyes unwavering. "I did what I had to do," he replied calmly. Doña Luz needed immediate care. Leaving her untreated wasn't an option. Dr. Sandoval's expression hardened. "This isn't about what she needed, it's about what you did. You put this hospital at risk, and for that, there are consequences." Armando's heart pounded, but outwardly he remained composed. "I understand the importance of rules, Dr. Sandoval, but there are times when compassion must come first." The ticking of the clock marked each second of tension, amplifying the silence that followed Armando's words. Dr. Sandoval's eyes narrowed, his lips a thin line. "Compassion does not pay the bills or keep this institution running. Your decision could have cost us dearly." Armando felt a surge of frustration. Isn't our primary duty to our patients to help those in need, regardless of their circumstances? Dr. Sandoval stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is not a debate, Salazar. You're fired. Collect your things and leave the premises immediately." Armando stood, his mind racing. "What about my patients? They depend on me." "They will be reassigned. This is the end of the discussion." Dr. Sandoval's tone brooked no argument. Armando nodded once, accepting the verdict with quiet dignity. "I understand," he said, his voice steady. "I'll gather my things." As he walked out of the office, the oppressive silence followed him, clinging like a second skin. The reality of his situation began to sink in. He had no job, and the burden of supporting his family now seemed insurmountable. Walking through the hospital one last time, he passed familiar faces. Colleagues who had become friends, patients who had trusted him. The news of his dismissal had not yet spread, but he could see the questions in their eyes, the unspoken concerns. In the locker room, Armando gathered his belongings slowly, his thoughts a whirlwind of fear and determination. He thought of Estela and Victoria, their faces vivid in his mind. Victoria's medical expenses were already a heavy load, and now, without his salary, the future seemed bleak. He closed his locker for the last time, the sound echoing in the empty room. "I have to find another way to support my family," he thought, his resolve hardening. There had to be another opportunity out there, another way to ensure that Victoria got the care she needed. As he walked out of the hospital, the morning sun was just beginning to light the sky. Armando felt a mix of fear and resolve. The city of Guadalajara bustled with its usual energy, a stark contrast to the turmoil in Armando's heart. He blended into the crowd, just another man with a burden to bear. But inside, he carried the quiet strength of someone who had faced adversity and refused to bow. The late afternoon sun cast a warm golden glow over the small apartment as Armando carefully guided Doña Luz inside. Her steps were slow, and she leaned on his arm for support, but there was a resolute strength in her demeanor. "Estela, we're home," Armando called out, his voice carrying a note of cautious hope. Estela appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. Her eyes, always expressive, filled with immediate warmth when she saw Doña Luz. "Welcome," Estela said with a gentle smile. Her kindness was genuine, a soft light that seemed to envelop everyone around her. "Please, make yourself at home." She guided Doña Luz to the table where a simple but inviting meal was laid out. Victoria, their 5-year-old daughter, bounded into the room, her face lighting up with excitement. "Look, Mama, I made a tower," she exclaimed, her tiny hands clapping in delight as she showed off her creation of blocks and toys. Her laughter filled the room, a pure, joyful sound that brought a smile to everyone's face. Doña Luz's eyes softened as she took in the scene. Tears welled up, unbidden, and she quickly brushed them away. Thank you," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. She sat down gingerly, overwhelmed by the warm welcome. Estela set a bowl of soup in front of her, the aroma of herbs and vegetables filling the air. "This will help you feel better," she said softly, her eyes meeting Doña Luz's with a reassuring gaze. Over dinner, the atmosphere grew more relaxed. The soft clinking of cutlery and the hum of conversation filled the room. Armando shared stories from his day, carefully skirting around the details of his dismissal. Estela chimed in with tales from her classroom, her voice animated as she recounted the antics of her young students. Doña Luz listened intently, absorbing the warmth and familiarity of their family life. It had been years since she had felt such a sense of belonging. "You've welcomed me like family," she thought, her heart swelling with gratitude. She glanced around the table, seeing the love and connection between Armando, Estela, and little Victoria. After dinner, Estela made tea, and they moved to the living room. The cozy space was filled with the soft glow of a lamp and the faint scent of jasmine from a nearby plant. Victoria continued to play, her innocent laughter a soothing backdrop to the conversation. "Tell us about yourself, Doña Luz," Estela prompted gently, sensing the older woman's hesitation. "We'd love to hear your story." Doña Luz took a deep breath, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. "My husband passed away many years ago, and I have no children. My days have been quiet and my nights long." She paused, looking at Armando. "But today I found a family again. Your kindness has brought me more than just comfort. It has given me hope." Armando felt a lump in his throat. "You're always welcome here, Doña Luz. We're glad you're with us." Estela nodded in agreement. "Yes, we're very happy to have you. This home is your home for as long as you need." As the evening wore on, the bond between them deepened. Doña Luz shared more about her past, her eyes brightening as she recounted happier times. Armando and Estela listened with genuine interest, their questions thoughtful and respectful. Victoria, now sleepy, climbed onto Armando's lap, her head resting against his chest. He held her gently, his heart full. The room was filled with a peaceful silence, broken only by the occasional sigh or rustle of movement. Later, as they prepared for bed, Estela turned to Armando. "You did the right thing, bringing her here," she said, her voice soft but firm. "She needed us, and we needed her too." Armando nodded, a sense of peace settling over him. "I know. It feels right." He kissed her forehead, grateful for her unwavering support. In the quiet of their room, Armando reflected on the day's events. Despite the uncertainty of his job situation, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Each morning, Armando donned his best suit, the fabric crisp and neatly pressed. He carried a stack of resumes, determination etched on his face. Today might be the day, he told himself, the mantra giving him a small boost of confidence as he left the apartment. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft golden light over Guadalajara. Doña Luz watched from the window, her eyes misty with gratitude. She clasped her hands together, silently praying for Armando's success. "You deserve the world, young man," she thought, a small smile playing on her lips. Armando's days were long and filled with rejection, but he never let it show. He knocked on doors, spoke to managers, and left his resume at countless clinics. His smile never wavered, even as polite refusals began to blur together. "Thank you for your time," he would say, maintaining his composure as he moved to the next opportunity. At night, the atmosphere at home was warm and comforting. Armando and Estela would return from their respective tasks, weariness etched in their movements, but always softened by the welcome awaiting them. Doña Luz had integrated seamlessly into their family, her presence bringing a sense of completeness. One evening, as the family gathered in the living room, Doña Luz shared stories from her past. The soft glow of the lamp illuminated her face, casting gentle shadows that danced as she spoke. Her voice was filled with nostalgia, each word a window into another time. "You remind me of my late husband," she confided to Armando one night, her eyes glistening with tears. "He was a good man, just like you, always helping others no matter the cost." She smiled through her tears, the memories bringing both joy and sadness. Armando felt a deep connection with Doña Luz. "Thank you for saying that," he replied softly. "It means a lot to me." Estela, sitting nearby, reached out and took Doña Luz's hand. "We're so glad you're here with us," she said sincerely. "You've become a part of our family." Victoria, playing quietly on the floor, looked up and grinned. "Doña Luz, tell us another story," she demanded, her youthful exuberance a delightful contrast to the reflective mood of the adults. Doña Luz chuckled, wiping her tears. All right, my dear. Another story it is. The days passed with a rhythm that was both challenging and fulfilling. Armando's search for a new job continued unabated. Each day he faced the same routine: prepare, present, and persevere. His hope never faltered, bolstered by the love and support of his family. One particularly challenging day, Armando visited a clinic in a bustling part of the city. The manager, a stern woman with sharp eyes, listened to his pitch but remained non-committal. "We'll keep your resume on file," she said curtly, handing it back to him. As he left the clinic, Armando felt a momentary dip in his spirits. Back at home, Doña Luz prepared a simple yet hearty meal, her way of contributing to the family that had given her so much. She glanced at the clock frequently, waiting for Armando's return. When he finally walked through the door, his face lined with fatigue, she greeted him with a warm smile. "How was your day, Armando?" she asked, handing him a cup of tea. He took a sip, savoring the warmth. "Long, but I'm not giving up," he replied, determination still evident in his voice. In the evenings, after the dishes were washed and Victoria was tucked into bed, the family would sit together, discussing the events of the day. Doña Luz's stories became a cherished part of these moments, her words weaving a tapestry of memories that enriched their lives. "You know," she said one night, her eyes twinkling with a mix of mischief and wisdom, "life has a funny way of working out, even when things seem their darkest. You just have to keep moving forward." Armando nodded, her words resonating deeply. "You're right, Doña Luz. We just have to keep moving forward." As the weeks turned into months, the bond between Doña Luz and Armando's family grew stronger. Her presence was a constant source of comfort and inspiration. And though the job search continued, Armando found solace in the unwavering support of those he loved. One morning, as he prepared for another day of job hunting, Armando caught a glimpse of Doña Luz at the window, her eyes following him with hope and prayer. He smiled and waved, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. "Today might be the day," he whispered to himself, stepping out into the morning light, ready to face whatever came next. The phone rang just as Armando was about to leave the apartment, the sharp sound cutting through the morning silence. He glanced at the clock. It was early, too early for casual calls. His heart skipped a beat, a mix of hope and anxiety flooding his senses. Estela, who was packing Victoria's school bag, looked up, her eyes questioning. "Hello, Armando Salazar speaking," he answered, trying to keep his voice steady. "Good morning, Mr. Salazar. This is Dr. Lopez from Hospital San Ángel. We have reviewed your application and would like to invite you for an interview today at noon." Armando felt a surge of excitement. "Thank you, Dr. Lopez. I'll be there." He hung up and turned to Estela, a broad smile spreading across his face. "They want to interview me today." Estela's face lit up. "That's wonderful, Armando. You've been waiting for this." Victoria, sensing the excitement, ran over. "Papa, are you going to get a new job?" "I hope so, querida," Armando replied, lifting her up and spinning her around. "But first, I need to prepare." Armando hurried to get ready, his mind racing with thoughts of the interview. He chose his best suit, the one he reserved for special occasions. As he knotted his tie, he caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror. His reflection looked back at him, determined and hopeful. As he finished dressing, Armando noticed something odd. "Estela, have you seen Doña Luz this morning?" Estela shook her head. "No, I thought she was still sleeping." Armando frowned. It wasn't like Doña Luz to be out of sight for so long. He checked her room, but it was empty. "Maybe she went for a walk," he suggested, trying to keep his worry at bay. "She does enjoy the morning air." Estela nodded, though her eyes held a trace of concern. She'll be back soon, I'm sure." With a quick kiss to Victoria and a reassuring smile to Estela, Armando grabbed his briefcase and headed out. As he walked to the bus stop, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss, but he pushed it aside, focusing on the task ahead. The bus ride to the hospital was a blur of thoughts and emotions. Armando went over potential interview questions in his mind, rehearsing his answers silently. The city moved past him in a series of familiar yet distant images. Shops opening for the day, people hurrying to work, children heading to school. It all seemed so normal, yet he felt a current of tension running beneath the surface. He arrived at Hospital San Ángel with time to spare. The imposing structure loomed before him, a place that held both memories and hope for the future. Armando took a deep breath, straightened his tie, and walked through the doors. The reception area was bustling, the air filled with the hum of activity. Armando approached the front desk, where a young receptionist greeted him with a professional smile. "Good morning. I have an interview with Dr. Lopez at noon," Armando said. "Of course, Mr. Salazar. Please take a seat. Dr. Lopez will be with you shortly," she replied, gesturing to a waiting area. As he sat down, Armando's thoughts briefly returned to Doña Luz. He hoped she was all right, that she had simply gone for a stroll and lost track of time. He pulled out his phone and sent a quick message to Estela, asking if Doña Luz had returned. Then he leaned back and closed his eyes, taking a moment to center himself. He replayed the past few months in his mind, the challenges, the uncertainty, and the unwavering support of his family. Each memory strengthened his resolve. This interview was more than a job opportunity. It was a chance to secure a better future for those he loved. Armando's phone buzzed, a message from Estela. "No sign of Doña Luz yet, but I'm sure she's fine. Focus on your interview. We're rooting for you." He smiled at the words, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The waiting area filled with the occasional clatter of footsteps and murmur of conversations, but Armando felt a calm determination settle over him. Whatever the outcome, he knew he was ready to give his best. Dr. Lopez appeared at the entrance to the waiting area, his presence commanding yet approachable. "Mr. Salazar, we're ready for you," he said with a nod. Armando stood, smoothing the front of his suit. "Thank you, Dr. Lopez. I'm ready." As he followed Dr. Lopez down the corridor, Armando's mind was a focused whirlwind of thoughts and hopes. He couldn't predict the outcome, but he knew one thing for certain. He would face whatever came next with the same quiet strength and determination that had carried him this far. The sun was just beginning to rise as Armando stepped into the Hospital San Ángel. He felt a sense of nostalgia mixed with nerves, the familiar scent of antiseptic and the faint hum of activity bringing back memories of his time there. But today, something was different. The hospital felt more welcoming, with smiles replacing the previous stern expressions. The walls, once bare and clinical, were now adorned with colorful paintings, creating a warm and inviting environment. Armando approached the reception desk, his palms sweaty as he introduced himself. "I'm here for an interview with Dr. Lopez," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. The receptionist smiled warmly. "Of course, Mr. Salazar. They're expecting you. Please follow me." As they walked through the corridors, Armando noticed the subtle changes everywhere. The atmosphere was lighter. The staff seemed more engaged. It was as if the entire hospital had undergone a transformation. The receptionist led him to a large conference room. "They're inside," she said, opening the door for him. Armando took a deep breath and stepped in. The room was spacious, with a long table at the center. Sitting at the head of the table was Doña Luz. She was impeccably dressed, her presence commanding respect and admiration. The sight of her there took his breath away. "Welcome, Armando," she said, her voice filled with warmth. Her eyes met his, and he saw the same kindness and strength he had come to admire in her at home. For a moment, Armando couldn't believe his eyes. He had known Doña Luz as a humble, grateful guest in his home, but here she was the embodiment of authority and grace. "Doña Luz?" he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. She smiled gently. "Yes, Armando. Please, have a seat." As he sat down, Armando's mind raced. How could this be? The woman who had been a part of his family's life for the past few months was now revealed as someone with significant influence and authority at the hospital. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the edge of the table, trying to steady himself. Dr. Lopez, seated next to Doña Luz, began the interview. "Armando, we're impressed with your experience and dedication. We'd like to discuss how you can contribute to the new vision we have for this hospital." Armando nodded, his heart pounding. "Thank you. I'm honored to be here," he said, his voice steadying as he spoke. He answered the questions with confidence, drawing on his experience and his passion for patient care. All the while, he couldn't shake the feeling of astonishment at Doña Luz's presence. As the interview progressed, Doña Luz began to speak. "Armando, I think it's time you understood the full story. This hospital was founded by my family many years ago. When I became unable to manage it directly, I entrusted it to others. Unfortunately, things did not go as planned." Armando listened intently, his admiration for her growing with each word. She explained how she had stepped away, only to find the hospital had lost its way, prioritizing profits over patient care. "When I realized what had happened, I knew I had to return and make things right," she said, her voice firm but compassionate. "We want to restore the values this hospital was built on: compassion, integrity, and excellence in care. And we believe you can help us achieve that," she continued, her eyes meeting Armando's with a sincerity that moved him deeply. Armando felt a surge of determination. "I'm committed to those values," he said earnestly. "I became a nurse to help people, and I want to be part of this change." Doña Luz smiled, her eyes shining with approval. "We know you are, Armando. That's why we want you on our team." Armando sat across from Dr. Lopez and Doña Luz in the familiar yet transformed office of Hospital San Ángel. The air was thick with anticipation. He could feel his heartbeat in his throat as Dr. Lopez began to speak. "Armando, we've been impressed with your dedication and vision," Dr. Lopez said, his tone serious but warm. "We would like to offer you the position of head nurse, with the potential to eventually direct this hospital." For a moment, Armando couldn't speak. His voice wavered with emotion as he finally managed to respond. "Thank you for this opportunity," he said, tears of gratitude streaming down his face. His heart felt full to bursting. "I won't let you down." Doña Luz smiled, her eyes reflecting the journey they had shared. "We believe in you, Armando. Your compassion and dedication are exactly what this hospital needs." Armando nodded, barely able to contain his emotions. "I'm ready to give it my all," he said, his voice steadier now, filled with determination. When he returned home that evening, Estela and Victoria were waiting anxiously. The moment he walked through the door, they could see the answer in his eyes. Estela's face broke into a radiant smile as she rushed to embrace him. "We did it," she whispered, her eyes sparkling with pride. and relief. Victoria, sensing the joy, ran to her father and wrapped her arms around his leg. "Daddy, did you get the new job?" she asked, looking up at him with wide, hopeful eyes. Armando lifted her into his arms, hugging her tightly. "Yes, sweetie, I did," he said, his heart overflowing with happiness. That evening, the family celebrated with a simple meal, their conversation filled with dreams and plans for the future. The air was charged with a sense of achievement and optimism, each word a testament to their shared journey and the challenges they had overcome. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the city, Armando stood outside the hospital. The fading light bathed the building in a golden hue, symbolizing a new beginning. "This is just the beginning," he thought, feeling a surge of hope and determination. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity as Armando settled into his new role. The responsibilities were immense, but he faced them with a renewed sense of purpose. Each day, he worked tirelessly to implement changes, fostering an environment where compassion and patient care were paramount. Doña Luz was a constant source of support, her wisdom and experience invaluable. Together, they worked to restore the hospital's reputation, focusing on patient-centered care and community outreach. The staff, inspired by the new leadership, embraced the changes with enthusiasm. One afternoon, as Armando walked through the bustling corridors, he paused to observe the interactions around him. Doctors and nurses moved with a sense of purpose, their expressions calm and focused. Patients were treated with kindness and respect, their needs prioritized above all else. It was a far cry from the hospital he had known before. Feeling a sense of fulfillment, Armando reflected on his journey. The power of kindness had brought him here, and it was kindness that would guide the hospital's future. Kindness can change the world, he realized, a smile spreading across his face. He knew the road ahead would have its challenges, but he was ready to face them with unwavering resolve. As he walked into his new role, the words of Doña Luz echoed in his mind. Life has a funny way of working out, even when things seem their darkest. You just have to keep moving forward. And that's exactly what Armando intended to do. Back at home, the family settled into a new routine. The evenings were filled with laughter and stories, the bond between them stronger than ever. Victoria, thriving under the stability her father's new job provided, filled their home with joy. One night, as Armando and Estela sat together, reflecting on the months past, Estela took his hand. "I'm so proud of you," she said softly. "You never gave up." Armando squeezed her hand gently. "I couldn't have done it without you," he replied, his voice filled with gratitude. "We did this together." As they looked towards the future, Armando felt a deep sense of peace. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had brought them to this moment. With kindness and determination, they had built a foundation for a brighter future. The hospital thrived under Armando's leadership, becoming a beacon of hope in the community. And through it all, Armando remained steadfast, guided by the principles that had brought him here. In the quiet moments, he often thought back to that day he found Doña Luz at the hospital entrance. It had been the beginning of a journey that had changed his life in ways he could never have imagined. And for that, he was eternally grateful.